Hello, so I'm Otto here for this week's Doodle Hangout. Um, so today we'll be talking about ledger balancing. First and foremost, if you are looking to get a question answered, um, please make sure you are watching live, and you can find that or it will show you at the bottom of the screen whether you are or not, just so you can get the answer as soon as possible since I'll be talking for about 20 minutes about ledger maintenance before going into questions. So, basically for ledger maintenance is starting off, every group needs to have a ledger in order to stay active. Hopefully you are getting that ledger passed down to you if you are a new treasurer from the old treasurer. So you have the financial history of your group from prior to your, initiation as a new treasurer. So if you haven't already, make sure you get that. Otherwise, assuming you already have a ledger, basically each line item should have its own separate page and be used to keep track of each financial transaction carried out in SOFO, and basically each line is going to be a separate transaction that might be having some connectivity issues. Nope, alright, looking good. So basically each line is going to be a different transaction, and it's just going to compile into multiple sheets. So make sure if you are still using one of SOFO's old ledger booklets, you separate those lines with multiple pages in between so it can continue on without skipping around. So basically the main qualification or requirement for ledgers is the quarterly balancing of SOFO accounts. Basically, we just asked for you to bring in your ledger, fill out an account reconciliation form, and then we check to make sure that your ledger matches the audit trail that we have in the office for your group. And if for some reason they don't match, try to find out the issue and resolve that as soon as possible. The purpose of this is to ensure that you, as a treasurer, are maintaining a ledger for your group, and also in order to have that checks and balances between, to check for any possible errors that could have happened on our end or through any financials. Basically, by having these quarterly, we are able to catch mistakes at an early enough basis to where hopefully the treasurer has information and would be able to recognize a possible faulty transaction. So basically your ledger should be filled out at the time of every transaction. So when you submit it to SOFO or have everything and that transaction is ready to submit to SOFO, part of that process should be filling out a line in the ledger. Again, this is to ensure that you don't miss any transactions or you have some verifiable documents to check against the audit trail to make sure nothing is, misplaced as far as which account got charged or which account got funding. So basically, the actual process of filling out a line in your ledger, the Prezi about account maintenance shows a very good description about a third of the way through the Prezi of how or what each slot in the SOFO ledger sheets, what the information needed in those spaces would best benefit your group as far as referring back to it and being able to actually use your ledger to help you as a treasurer. So basically, the critical information needed is obviously the date, the voucher number associated with that transaction, a description of the transaction, which would hopefully name the payee, provided description, and then once a check is made for that transaction, include the check number and date of the check in the description line as well. Then there's a column for just check marks if the item has been posted in SOFO, so that means it's showing up on your audit trail now. And then a column for checks and a column for deposits. So that would be either a debit, so anytime you're using your group's funds for activities or such, or deposits where you are funding your account. And then the final column would be for keeping a running balance, and that's just so you know at all times what your balance is. One key thing for making sure for this running balance line is, as you probably remember from training, NU Financials transactions take up to 45 days to post in your audit trail. However, if you receive the paid invoice from, for example, Quartet Copies or events planning, something like that, you should immediately put that in your ledger so you can be prepared for that charge hitting your account later on in the quarter, and maybe 1 to 2 months later, or up to 1.5 months later. So this is very critical, because if your group doesn't have a whole lot of funding, one large events planning charge that hasn't hit your account yet, you might forget about it and think you have more funds than you do in actuality, and that would obviously affect your budgeting going forward. So if you have this ledger that you keep on updating for all these NU Financials charges, then you would be able to know at all times what your correct balance is once all charges and all funding are processed in SOFO. So just keep that in mind. I have seen a few groups that spent their money and then ended up being frozen for a deficit because they forgot about an NU Financials charge and really had to kind of stop group activities for the rest of the quarter until they received additional funding because of not being up to date with their true group's balance. So that is a very important thing, and you should keep your ledger up to date for that reason. Obviously, the other reason for keeping your ledger up to date is to kind of space out the workload necessary for an account reconciliation. So basically, instead of having to spend an hour or maybe even more updating your ledger at the end of every quarter when you are trying to get your account reconciled, if you just space it along throughout the quarter, it's a much easier process, especially since you already have all the transaction documents in front of you, instead of just referring to whatever the description on the audit trail or on Wildcat Connection would be. That is actually a nice segue into talking a little bit about Wildcat Connection. That's another great resource you have for keeping your ledger up to date. If you are wondering if a transaction is posted in SOFO, you can go to your Wildcat Connection page under the Finance tab and look to see if that transaction has posted, and whether it's putting that check mark in the column I spoke of earlier, or remembering to write that transaction down in your ledger once you see the transaction in Wildcat Connection. Either way, it's a good resource for treasurers to keep up to date with their account. And then as far as ledger balancing goes, it's a relatively painless process as long as you do follow these guidelines as far as maintaining your ledger, and hope if everything is correct, it's just the process at the window would just be making sure every transaction matches, not just like the final balance, and then after that it's just signing the account reconciliation form, and then your group would be fully balanced. If there is an issue and it's possibly an any financials charge that was initiated before the account reconciliation but hasn't hit your account yet and will hit your account after the reconciliation, that type of knowledge, as long as you know that and express that to the attendant that is reconciling your account, again, it would just be a very painless process. There's a section of the account reconciliation form for transactions that haven't posted yet, so it's pretty straightforward. The only difficult part of account reconciliations would be when you are unaware of a possible charge, and most of the time if we look and see that it should have been made to another group, again it's relatively fast and straightforward. However, more of these charges that are disputed, or the treasurer is just unaware of them and doesn't want to, obviously no one should be blindly accepting whatever is on the audit trail without trying to figure out what the actual event or charge was for. So if that type of transaction comes up where the treasurer reconciling has no prior knowledge, that's when it gets a little stickier and can take a little bit longer, and might require leaving the office, finding out that information by either contacting the old treasurer that was maybe in place at that time of that transaction, or contacting whatever department charged you, such as events planning or Quartet, to find more information and possibly get an invoice for that charge, so you can see the date that the charge was initiated or that the event was, and other information like that to better understand that transaction. One other thing to note is you don't really have to use the SOFO ledger sheets. It's a resource we provide, but isn't necessarily a requirement. You can use any accounting software. We see a lot of groups that use Excel, and just kind of create their own template for in an Excel document for keeping track of transactions. and that works perfectly fine. It makes the running balance go a lot easier. Um, if like you put formulas in a cell so it like automatically updates and stuff like that. That's typically seen in larger groups, um, and that's just because of like the time needed to like initiate the change from just ledger worksheets to Excel. Um, it could be kind of great depending on the size of your group. So really, like as long as the same information is shown in an Excel document, that's fine. Just bring in your laptop, email it to SOFO, so then when you come in, um, we can like just pull up the file from the email, um, or something along those lines. There is no automatic um, reconciliation where you can do it remotely. However, um, the process could potentially be easier depending on the size of your group if you are using Excel. It's really just whatever the preference of the treasurer is, whether you're using Excel or in paper format. Trying to think if there's anything else. Again, I just can't stress enough how you should be, constantly updating your account instead of possibly, waiting to the end of the quarter and then backtracking through the whole quarter. Obviously, that hassle could be a lot smaller for those groups that have less transactions, but also just for like general knowledge of and like awareness of your account. You should be keeping a ledger so those and your financial charges don't trip you up later down the road. Other than that, I think that's all I have. It is now 7:20. So I'll be here till 8 o'clock. Just if anybody has a question so they can ask. Otherwise, I'm going to mute my microphone so I don't bother the video audio. Alright, have a nice night. If you are signing off now, and see you at SOFO. Alright, going to sign off. Have a nice night.